Hi, everyone. Sean Waldman with Secure Cyber Defense, and welcome to the very first episode of CS Cyber. I've got Chad here with me. I'm
Chad.
Sean, hence the CS piece. And this is our first episode where we're going to talk about the Rockwell Automation Bulletin that started discussing basically customer guidance for how to secure industrial control systems. So we're just going to take a shot at that.
Yeah. Well, why don't you kick it off? You've done a lot of water assessments, and
Right.
that's specifically SCADA. So
Okay.
why don't you kick that off?
All right. So let's just start out with what I've seen. It's not pretty out there from a control system perspective. Some of the main things that I've seen go wrong when I've been out assessing water systems. First of all, operators have a loose understanding, not a complete understanding of what they have. So definitely a lack of inventory knowledge, what PLCs they have, what SCADA system that they're running. And, I talked about it on the weekly cyber update a little bit. The top 18 controls is something that even in the industrial control world we look at, because what do? Well, they list the importance, right? And what's number one and number two?
Know what you have.
Right.
Hardware, software.
Exactly. So if you don't know what you have, your ability to mount a defense or respond to a technical bulletin that maybe Rockwell or Siemens or somebody puts out that says, hey, if you've got this controller and it's running on this version, you need to patch it because Iran is attacking it. Well, how quickly can you do that?
You have no idea how many of them you have.
Right.
So.
Exactly. So that's probably number one. Inventory for sure is something that I've seen. The second thing that I've seen is poor architecture. So firewalls, not properly firewalling off the industrial control system.
Well, how about this? Maybe talk a little bit about what the architecture just looks like, right? I mean, for a SCADA system.
Okay. So don't attack me on this. I'm just going to give my perspective on what I've seen and what I've tried to encourage customers to do. There is some very specific guidance out there about how to design and implement a control system for sure. I'm not going on this show. I'm not going to go into that level of detail. But if you're watching this and you know what the Purdue model is, that is one thing that is used for sure as far as architecting an industrial control system. In general, what I would like to see is I definitely see, like, especially at the local government level, I see definitely a firewall that's separating the internet from the local government for sure. But what I'd like to see is I'd like to see more of a firewall downstream at the water plant or the wastewater plant that is separating the administrative network of the plant from the actual control system.
So let's just stop there. So what you're seeing is a firewall at the enterprise level, and then that water plant just connected to
sometimes
the corporate
I have
network.
seen that. Yes.
Maybe something in there separating the two, but kind of loose.
Yeah, it's been loose. So that's what I'd like to see. So I'd like to see another physical firewall at the plant that's maybe got a DMZ on it that we can wall off some control systems that maybe need to talk to the internet or need to bridge from the internet or from the local network to the control system, because there are some very strict firewall rules that need to be in there, restricting that communication. So really identifying what those ports and protocols are, to map
Right.
those out. The other thing that I've seen is, and this is specific to Fortinet that I've seen, is an industrial control license. So when you're talking about intrusion prevention systems, like IPS systems, having a firewall that's aware of industrial controls, I think is extremely important, because now you've got the ability to have a listener right inside the firewall that is aware of things like Siemens and Rockwell.
The protocols they talk on.
Yeah, right. The protocols and the vulnerabilities as well. So, and then, one of the last or two other things that I've seen is just systems not patched at all. So I wasn't prepared for that really when I was doing assessments, because And I think where this comes from is at one point, and we've seen people inside our YouTube channel on some of the other videos that we've done talking a lot about this, like, what do you mean these systems are exposed to the internet? Well, that's just how it works nowadays. I think back in the day, they were isolated. They were air gapped.
Well, yeah, we were just talking about that just before we started taping this, right? So back in the day, they were completely isolated. There was no internet connectivity to those things. So now, fast forward 20 some years, almost 30 years later,
Right.
none of these systems have been patched because there was really no way other than SneakerNet.
Right. And there's various reasons why these control systems were exposed. We can get into that later. But so now, I've gone into some of these environments and seen control systems from the 90s that haven't been patched. So now, again, fast forward to today, we get all these bulletins that come out, like specific to industrial controls that show vulnerabilities and vulnerabilities that need to be patched, right? Just like the normal discussions that we have about Windows systems, right? But there's no real way to again, back to the top two critical controls, like, well, do I have that control system? Do I have that version? Do I have the expertise and the ability to patch that? So that's one thing. And then the last thing is just, how many times have you seen an incident control or an industrial control system have an incident response plan specific to that?
I've never seen one.
Right.
I rarely see incident response plans, actually.
Yeah, right. No, that's true. So there's a lot, man. Like, there's just, and I know there's this big push right now. The reason that we're even talking about this today is we are continually seeing water systems and wastewater systems hit specifically. Yeah. They're doing more and more damage, so they're emptying water tower tanks. Which means that they can get to the control system and make a change, which is scary. So there's the letter that came from the EPA that came out recently to all the states and said, hey, get to assessing your stuff. We need to basically assess every water and wastewater system in the United States. There's tens of thousands of them.
Right.
There probably are not enough people, right, to get to all of these systems to assess them. So, that's what's going on today.
Yeah. Well, why don't we hop into the bulletin?
Yeah, so the bulletin itself, and, Micah can post maybe some screenshots of what this looks like. The first one is publicly available. We'll put it in the show notes. It's basically an advisory about, and there's a login required to get to the first one. But essentially, what it's going to tell you about is Shodan. And, Shodan essentially is, you can go to it today. It's SHODAN. Shodan is a website that crawls the internet for publicly available systems. And that can be used for good or for bad.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's one of the first things that it brings to attention is that Shodan is likely being used for nefarious purposes. And that's likely where the attackers are getting the majority of their information.
It shows them exactly where to go.
It does. It gives them the link. I mean, and if you've got a publicly exposed control system or a PLC or something, it's going to map it, right? And if you don't have a password on it, it's going to be pretty easy through Shodan to get access to that control system and start playing around potentially.
Yeah.
The next one is an NSA document through CISA of recommended immediate actions to reduce exposure across control systems, and that's going to go into a lot of just having a resilient plan for OT or for operational technology. And what's the first thing they recommend?
Inventory.
Yep, inventory and disconnect from the internet. Right.
Yep.
So if you've got something exposed to the internet, disconnect it. But then that's part of the problem that I've seen is if you don't know it's exposed, you may not know that, right? So it goes into a lot of other detail, patching, incident response plan, so tabletop exercising.
I think really that's a big one, right? I mean, just practicing, just doing a walkthrough with your team can make a huge impact when that day comes, right? And just having to if you don't have an IRP, just a general idea of what you're going to do, just having the discussion can make a big difference.
Yeah, we had a customer this week lose an HMI system to a hard drive outage. And that's a really good opportunity, even if you're just sitting around the table and saying, hey, what would happen if we lost one of our HMIs to a hardware issue? It wasn't even cyber related.
Yeah.
Right? Just regular hard drive failure. So do we have the backup systems? Can the plant operate in manual mode? I know that in water and wastewater, that's a normal thing, I think, to test. Do we have the ability to operate manually? But, where is that in your response plan?
Right.
There's the Safe Drinking Water Act 1433, which is out there, which is a requirement for water systems to document and exercise and update their incident response plans at least every 5 years, right? That's a long time. So I definitely recommend shortening that and maybe saying maybe every couple years, maybe at minimum. What do you think about that?
I mean, I would say it's something to pull off the shelf at least yearly.
Yeah.
And review. If there's
Right.
no changes, there's no changes. And I think in some of these systems, I mean, this gear is in place for a long period of time, right? It's not like a laptop or something like that you're swapping out every 3 to 5 years. Some of these systems have been in place for 30 plus years, right? So
yeah. Well, and I think I was reading too, like on average, and I don't have a base of where they came up with the calculation, but I'd seen in a city that had posted a request for proposals to update their SCADA system, that they were stating that 10 or 15 years is about the lifespan of a SCADA system. And I would agree with that. I would definitely say that these are typically systems that can potentially take a large amount of money, a large amount of capital to update. We're actually seeing some control systems go to the internet. So I've seen SCADA systems that are internet-based, which, yeah, I know. It doesn't sit well with me either. So, that is becoming a thing. Yeah, I know. I feel the same way. That's becoming a thing. And then, for sure, like hardening your network, really locking down. Let's talk for a minute about remote access. So TeamViewer has seemed to be the number one thing that I've seen where water plants and wastewater plants are using TeamViewer as a way for plant operators to remotely access. So what are your thoughts on like privileged access management?
Well, you can't use TeamViewer, right? I think a lot of these things have come in via either the operator has brought them in or the local government, the city, whoever owns the plant just doesn't know any better, right? So one of the two have to really take a stand. If it's the city and say, hey, these are our standards, you have to use this if you're going to operate our plant, or the vendors step up to the plate and say, hey, we're not just going to willy-nilly put any software that we can access out there.
Right.
This is how we're going to securely do it. And at least, have a little stake in the game when it comes to security. Because I don't think a lot of operators do, right? I mean, their mission is to operate the plant. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. I don't think this is something where, somebody wakes up and goes, hey, how can I maliciously expose my water plant? I think these are just practices that have happened over time in order to to promote some type of convenience. A lot of these plants operate with not a lot of staff. So there may be that type of situation where maybe an operator needs to respond to an alarm and log in. So if you just like look at some of the stuff that we've seen in non-OT areas where we've seen firewalls time and time again, I reported on the weekly cyber update about Checkpoint having a VPN vulnerability. How many times we've seen Fortinet with a VPN vulnerability, and Cisco. Yep. If it were me, one of the things that I would just say is, let's change the way we do things. So maybe look at, this is not a podcast where we promote specific products, but I'm giving an example of something that we have used. Beyond Trust. Yeah. It offers a privileged access management platform that I think is completely stellar for industrial controls. And I would highly recommend seriously looking at that type of technology to take not only take the place of things like TeamViewer and AnyDesk and stuff like that, but even taking taking just traditional VPN or SSL VPN and moving it to privileged access management. That's my thoughts.
No, I would agree with that. I mean, you can't make it overly complicated to get in and do your job, right? But you have to have some sort of checks and balances in place to make sure that it's just not legacy just sitting out there.
Well, and I'll tell you, one of the things that I really liked about the Beyond Trust platform, and again, not they're not giving us money for this, and they don't even know we're talking about it. So one of the things that I like the most is, number one, it's MFA, obviously. Number two, there's a lot of auditing capability to know who got in and who got out. There's a lot of alerting a lot of alerting rules that if somebody logs in, it can send an email to a ticket system, right, to start that change control process. And then what I really, really like is the ability to record the session. Yeah. So if you've got a vendor that's logging in, right, to do changes, there's some accountability there. You can give them a unique username and password. You can enforce MFA. You can enforce timeframes if you don't want them logging in the middle of the night. If you want escorted access, you can be a part of that session. And then the recording, I think, is really the icing on the cake, where if anybody ever questions anything or something has changed that you didn't authorize, you can always go back to the recording and look at what happened.
Right. I think, and Beyond Trust, we're talking about SCADA, but it works in a lot of other different, it'll work with any software, right? It's access into the environment. So.
Right. So a couple other areas, they definitely recommends the CISA bulletin, definitely mapping, like a network map, of course. There's we've also seen control systems. I'd say one of the good things about control system networks that are commercially designed is there's a lot of as-built documents. So the vendors are typically very good, from what I've seen, of dropping the documentation of what it looked like at the time they left. For the most part, these systems don't change very often. So once a control system goes in, unless a water plant, adds additional capabilities, or maybe a city is growing and it adds additional well fields, and unless those types of things happen, the documentation that I've seen has been pretty good.
Yeah. Well, let's talk. A little bit before we end here, let's talk about like the layered security approach, right? I was reading a Rockwell Bulletin the other day, and there was no patch available. Like, the gear was so old, there was no patch.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Right.
Beyond Trust, firewalls. What are like maybe the top four things that you would recommend people take a look at?
You mean for systems that can't be patched?
Yeah, or just SCADA in general.
So, kind of our normal operation or normal MO is definitely, looking at the Purdue model and how the control system is designed today. So IP addressing for sure. Looking at dual homing on HMIs, I think that's a very common thing to maybe use the HMI as a broker between the management network and the control system network. So I think breaking that and using DMZs and more of a, just kind of a better holistic firewall architecture for sure. The Beyond Trust is definitely something for remote access. So we really shut down that agent, exposing the HMI directly to the internet. So the way Beyond Trust works is it's kind of a jump box technology, which can be hosted with them, or you can put it in VMware yourself on-prem. But it's really good for that. And I'll tell you one of the things. Endpoint detection and response. So we still see like antivirus, like sometimes no antivirus or legacy antivirus on HMIs. And I really highly recommend moving to EDR technology and endpoint detection and response. So that's another layer for sure. And then logging. So there's usually not a lot of good logging inside a control system network. I think logging has been something, just historically, I think organizations really struggle with.
Yeah. You have all these logs. You're like, what do I do with these logs?
Yeah, right. But now, if you look at today with all the all the regulatory requirements for, archiving logs, and really what that comes down to is having something that we can threat hunt against too. So if we're looking for, if you just take the Volt Typhoon stuff over the last 5 years, right? All the Volt Typhoon news about how China has been embedded in our control system networks for over 5 years. Mm-hmm. The only way that you're going to be able to, well, it's really even not about defending against that because it's already happened, right? The only way that you're going to be able to look for that bad guy and try and root them out or see if they're still there is through threat hunting technology and being able to have those artifacts that you can look at from a logging perspective to be able to see if you can pick up on those indicators, right? Are they talking? Are they trying to talk? Because some of it's, trying to look for something moving in the dark.
That's sure. Really about early detection, right? I mean, after 5 years, after 3 years, that's just become normal, right? Like it would be very difficult to pick up on that after that period of time.
Yeah, and that is the problem. So, all things being what they are, we would have loved for the front door not to have been left open for 5 years, right?
Right.
But to your point, we're talking about a bad guy making his way onto your couch and sitting there for 5 years, right? I would have much rather had this alarm system on in the first place and not get it to the point where I've got somebody been sitting in my house forever.
Right.
And it does. It really makes, especially if you look at just the Chinese and how they do things from a cyber perspective, they do a lot of living off the land. So, they're masquerading and embedding themselves into already existing systems and software to evade detection. And man, once somebody's made their way into a network for 5 years, we looked at the same thing with SolarWinds. How do you find all that, right? How do you find all the areas that they've nestled themselves in and embedded themselves? It's almost like you got to burn the network down.
Yeah, I mean, to a sysadmin, it just looks like normal everyday traffic, right? I mean, they've been there so long that it's just normal now.
Yeah. And I think the last thing is really, adding. I think we really have to look at industrial control center, critical infrastructure, industrial networks, water, wastewater, power, medical. I'll go down the whole list of monitoring. I really think I'm going to talk just for a minute about my experiences in Israel. Right, you've been with me.
Yeah.
And one of the centers that we saw in Beersheba was we went to the INCD, the Israeli National Cyber Directorate, and we saw the CISA version basically of Israel called IL-CERT. And one of the things that happens in Israel is they have, at their IL-CERT building, they have different rooms that are dedicated to the different critical infrastructure areas. So they have one for medical. They have one, so all of their hospitals, they have all the local cybersecurity at these facilities, but they also feed a stream to the IL-CERT in Beersheba for some additional system monitoring. So in case something gets missed at the local level, there's another layer.
Right. The second set of eyes looking over your shoulder.
Absolutely. So I really think that it's going to get to the point, is at the point where, and I don't know how you do it, right? Because there's the original area where the EPA got into trouble, where they were trying to force these more stringent cybersecurity practices on these smaller operators, and it really started to come down to funding, right? You're pushing all these new requirements bound, but we have absolutely zero way to pay for it. So how does that translate? It might end up in levies, additional levies that go towards additional cybersecurity standards. I know nobody's going to like these answers. Right. It might come down to higher water rates. It might come down to a number of things to pay for these new technologies, these additional technologies. But these threats didn't exist 10 years ago.
Right. But that's a pretty tough pill to swallow when you have a 30-year-old infrastructure that already requires funding, right? So.
No, I totally agree. But, Chad, I've seen government agencies, even recently, put all this money into revamping their entire water and wastewater systems, and I bet you not make a huge investment in the cyber aspect while they were doing it.
Right. That's the key, right? A holistic approach to like a whole refresh.
Right. And I think, somebody was asking me the other day too, they were like, why why did water and wastewater get left behind? And what happened? You know, why is electric? Why is there not all this emphasis on hacking the electric grid? And there's still that threat. But I think what you'll find, and again, you know, we're open to comments in YouTube about this. So, you know, we're having a discussion. And if somebody has a better view, or, you know, please tell us.
Yeah.
But it's been in my experience that the electric area is more heavily regulated. And so I think the threats are a little bit less from that perspective. And very honestly, just to be completely transparent, Iran reads the news over here. So when they saw that the EPA got sued and that the EPA pulled back their new stringent cybersecurity standards, I don't think it took 30 or 60 days for Iran to start hitting water plants in the U.S.
No, showed them the way.
Exactly. Yeah. So hopefully, you know, this was informative. You know, this was just kind of our ability to, you know, kind of just chat about some of the things that we've seen.
Yeah.
I think the point of CS Cyber is to bring some of those field experiences, you know, that you and I have done a lot of work in different areas, and just kind of letting an audience know, you know, kind of what we've seen.
That's my favorite thing to talk about, is kind of findings from the field, right? What you're seeing every day, just out in the wild.
Right. And everybody will be listening to this also. This will be a podcast that we're sending to some of the major podcast areas. Like, yeah, man.
I'm really excited about that.
We're stepping up. So you'll be able to find this soon, hopefully on Apple Podcasts and some of the other Spotify and podcast channels. So please like, subscribe, share the podcast. On YouTube, make your comments, you know, because we pick up on those comments, and, you know, that helps with other content going forward.
Right. We talk about them. I mean, we talk about the comments. We talk about what we want to do with the comments. So.
Yeah, and when we see those comments, we do. We see them when they come in, and we talk about them. So please, you know, this is an active audience. So I appreciate your time. Thanks for showing up. And hey, let's be careful out there.